starting the recording, should people want to revisit it later. Just a little bit of structure. We start off with some blessings for the morning. We are going to study Hana this morning, and then we finish off with blessing of Rosh Chodesh. So we've had a few months together that people are hopefully starting to get used to the music. If you are, that's wonderful. Please sing along. And if it's new, mute yourself and still sing along because nobody's judging.
I was going to ask, you want us to mute ourselves?
When we're singing, yes, but it's very much a conversational based learning. So please, when we're talking, please unmute yourselves and share. So I'm going to share my screen now. So this is Rosh Chodesh Av. You'll notice in the background, it's kind of dark and dreary, and we'll get to why the dark and dreary background of Rosh Chodesh Av a little bit later. But we start off with, Asher Yatzar, that we bless our bodies, that each morning we wake up and God willing, they function. I thank you for my life, body and soul. Help me realize I am beautiful and whole. I'm perfect the way I am, and a little perfect and a little broken too. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. Whoa, this part's nice and easy. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei chol basar umafli la'asot. Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei chol basar umafli la'asot. Whoa, 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 whoa. I thank you for my life, body and soul. Help me realize I am beautiful and whole. I'm perfect the way I am, and a little broken too. I will live each day as this gift I give to you. We finish off with our woes. Whoa, 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 whoa. So interesting. I'm just thinking, and we're going to get to this idea that the woes in this song, if I just say, oh, what are your woes, right? You might go, ugh. But the woe, those sounds in this prayer is a sound of joy, and keep that idea that the intentionality behind what we say can change the meaning. So we're going to be studying Torah, so we join together in the words of our Torah blessing. Sweet as honey, sweet as honey, sweet as honey on our tongues. Sweet as honey, sweet as honey, sweet as honey on our tongues. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah la'asok b'divrei Torah. Sweet as honey, sweet as honey, sweet as honey on our tongues. Sweet as honey, sweet as honey, sweet as honey on our tongues. So sweet our Torah is. So I'll start off. I challenge you, please now pray silently. Raise your hand if that was awkward. Yeah, I appreciate that. We're going to get to why. So when you think about a prayer service, what are the prayers that occur regularly? What's the matbeo? What's the structure? What happens every time we pray?
Good question.
Well, we always start out with Baruch Atah Adonai.
Okay, so we've got some language that happens regularly. Those words Baruch Atah Adonai ... Absolutely. So we've got a language structure. What other prayers happen with regularity?
The Avot, the Shema, the Hafta.
Great.
Aleinu.
Hashivenu, Aleinu.
Mm-hmm.
Prayers for healing.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Moda Anachnu Lach, we've started doing regularly.
Oh, okay, right. So maybe, yeah, prayers for gratitude. Absolutely. So all of these that you have mentioned are part of the structure of prayer. And I'm going to throw one in, typically silent prayer, right? That typically happens too. But there's a reason why the silent prayer felt awkward when I said, okay, now pray silently. Because we are emotionally connected to the structure of our prayers. So this is the structure of a typical prayer service. This is the structure of a morning service. So instead of on the left, if we think about this in terms of a Friday night service, instead of Birchot HaShachar and Psukei DeZimra, we would have Kabbalat Shabbat. So those Lecha Dodi and Lechuna Ranana and those kinds of prayers.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll start with that and continue on. Someone mentioned Shema, Baruch Hu, that Baruch Atah Adonai, those structures. Leading into the Amidah. And the Amidah, many of the things that you mentioned fall into the Amidah. So prayers of gratitude. And this is the structure, whether it's a weekday service, whether it's a Shabbat service, right? We kind of pull out different terms for different things. But generally speaking, our prayer service is this structure. And what do you notice about the shape of this diagram? Because it's quite intentional. Yeah, Carolyn's pointing up, right? We have to start where we come in. We have to begin at that ground level before we can literally take off. And our prayers are structured in such a way that emotionally we grow in height. I actually like this plane analogy, not necessarily this notion that God lives in the heavens. We can reach God and meet God wherever we are, but it's a good visual for people that need metaphor, right? So if we think about taking off, leaving the ground is that Baruch Hu Shema, that moment of I'm beginning this conversation with God. And as we continue our prayers, we continue that ascent. So if you look, the silent prayer typically happens at the conclusion of the Amidah, once we have kind of reached altitude, right? We have to prepare ourselves. If here it says the Amidah is a conversation with God, I'm going to say the silent prayer is a continuation of the conversation, but a little bit different. And it has to do with these two ideas. So within prayer, there are many types of prayer, but one of the ways we understand them is keva versus kavana. Keva are the words that we speak. They are the Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, fill in the blank. They are the structure that we just looked at, and the both the traditional words that we say and those reform modifications and growths that we've added. But what is kavana? Kavana is the intentionality behind our prayer. So kavana might be a reading that helps us understand the context of a prayer. Kavana, frankly, is the music that we set our keva to. So if the words of Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu are the keva, Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Lishalom, the music, the notes are the kavana. And the silent prayer is what happens when you remove the keva and you rely entirely on the kavana. So in order to get to a place where we can have that completely heart-driven conversation with God, we have to have used the words that we're used to saying before we're ready to have that silent conversation with God. And that's why it might have felt a little awkward when I just started our time together and said, pray silently. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on this? Does this resonate at all? Go ahead and share.
I think that when you pray, you should be mindful to understand the words and use your heart, even as you're ascending up to having a conversation with God. Otherwise, it just becomes rote.
Well, and that's exactly the goal, is that we don't have a service entirely made up of keva, that we're constantly balancing the keva and the kavana. And that's why we also don't come into services with no structure and expect the kavana to guide us. Now, that being said, if you walk into an Orthodox synagogue, it's going to rely much more heavily on the keva. Right. It's not that one prayer is better or worse, it's just different. So we have lots of different ways and formats to pray. And why this is important is because of our heroine of the day. It's because of Hannah. So you're going to see a lot of these themes throughout the story of Hannah. So keeping in mind this notion of keva as the brain, the rote, the words, and kavana is the heart, the intentionality behind what we do and how we do it. So are we clear on those two words? I don't know if they're new for people, but if they are, I want to make sure that we are entering into our conversation with understanding those words.
For me, Cantor, the music is very much the kavanah. For me, praying, like even just hearing the music without the words is kavanah. I don't know that that's true for everybody, but it very much is for me.
Me too. Me too.
I find when we're asked to pray silently, it becomes a very personal prayer, as opposed to a prayer on behalf of the congregation or thanking God. And it's a very different kind of prayer, my silent prayer.
What is keva again?
Words.
Words.
Kavanah is intention.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Well,
Did,
my
there-
grandmother used to talk to God. Conversations out loud.
Were you just kicked off or did it just kick me off?
You were missing.
We continued without you.
Fabulous. What did I miss?
I was asking for the translations again.
Of Keva and Kavana.
Mhm.
Have other people helped you?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. I really hope that's not going to become a problem. It shouldn't. I'm on the highest Wi-Fi speed.
Well, we're expecting a storm, so you can't ever tell.
That
Sure.
is true. Okay. Are we able to see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay. So starting over, there was a man from Ramatayim of the Zuphites in the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. He had two wives, one named Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah was childless. This man used to go up from his town every year to worship and to offer sacrifice to the Eternal of Hosts at Shiloh. One such day, Elkanah offered a sacrifice. He used to give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. To Hannah, he would give parallel portions, for Hannah he loved, and the Eternal had closed her womb. Moreover, her rival, to make her miserable, would taunt her that the Eternal had closed her womb. This happened year after year. Every time she went up to the house of the Eternal, the other would taunt her so that she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why are you crying and why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? Okay, so what drama is being set up here?
Well, one thing is that a woman considered herself no good if she didn't have children.
There you go. There you go. And if we think back to Ruth, right, that was such a thread too, that she had no sons to give to these wonderful, beautiful daughters-in-law, and she had nothing to give her if she didn't have these children. All right, so we've got a real problem here that she can't have children, and that really is how women of the Bible gain their worth to a certain extent. So is this a common problem? I mean, I mentioned Ruth. Can you think of other women in Tanakh that are faced with similar problems?
There seem to be a lot of them.
Yeah, it really is a common problem. So if we think back to Hagar and Sarah in our first story of Abraham, why does Abraham take Hagar as a wife? Because Sarah can't have children. Now, the difference there is Hagar is a servant. It's not kind of two marriages out of love, but there's a lot of drama that ensues between the children of Hagar and Sarah, in that we end up with an entirely new people that even to today we wonder, are we brothers and sisters with? Is it a good relationship or is it a negative relationship? So Hannah's status, can you get anything about who she is from this opening paragraph?
You know, it's funny when I think about this opening paragraph. I wonder if her husband really understood what was really bothering her. To me, it seemed the fact that she was being made fun of and being bullied almost by other women. Maybe that came into why she cried as much as that she couldn't have children. So I don't think her husband really got it exactly right.
Mm-hmm. He tried to love her. He tried to give her what he gave the others. I think this last line, am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? I think he tried, but But to your point, I'm not sure if he totally got it. Because he had other children by these other women, even if he didn't love the women the same way that he loved Hannah. So the point that I'm trying, Hannah is not, she's not connected by, we don't get her lineage. It's not like we're trying to connect her to other people. She's not a princess, you know, she's just a woman. We haven't tried to establish her as, you know, we're in the book of Samuel as a prophet. There's nothing about her. She is you, she is me. She is a woman who is just distraught that she cannot have children. How would you characterize Penina? I know, Sharon, you called her a bully. I think that's a fair word. Any other thoughts about Penina?
She may have been jealous that Elkanah loved Hannah. Maybe he loved her even more than Penina. And that's her way of, you know, being resentful.
That really, she was trying to hurt him by hurting her. That's manipulative and fairly female. Maybe just a little. Maybe she feels a little like a normal woman too. Other thoughts that we find her jealous, that she's a bully. Any other thoughts there?
No, I agree with what was just said. I think she felt resentful because she wasn't loved in the same way.
Yeah, I you can definitely feel that.
When they describe him as in the hill country, what does that make him? A farmer or ordinary person, or was he someone special, Elkanah?
Yeah, same idea. These are just two normal people. We're getting their stories. We're going to find out why we're getting their stories, but they don't seem to be of famous lineage. They're from, you know, the backwoods. So we'll find out a little bit more of that. So, you know, I want to try and throw Elkanah a bone here. I think he is trying to support Hannah, I think fairly unsuccessfully, but he is attempting to show his love for her by what he gives her and his level of devotion. So after they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose. The priest Eli was sitting on the seat near the doorpost of the sanctuary of the Eternal. In her bitterness, she prayed to God, weeping all the while. She made vow after vow, O God of hosts, if you will look upon the suffering of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant and give your servant a human seed, I will dedicate him to the eternal for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever touch his head. As she kept on praying before the Eternal, Eli watched her mouth. Hannah was speaking on her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Eli said to her, "How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Sober up." And Hannah replied, "Oh no, my lord. I am a woman of difficult spirit. I have drunk no wine or other strong drink, but I have been pouring out my heart to God. Do not take your servant for a worthless woman, for it is because of the greatness of my complaint that my anger that I have spoken till now." "Then go in peace," said Eli, "and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked." She answered, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." So the woman left and she ate, and her face was no longer sad. So describe for me this scene. What did Hannah look like? What is it that Eli saw that he responded, "You're drunk"? What could Hannah have looked like in her prayer?
She probably looked like she was talking to herself.
Yeah. She was
Um,
praying silently, so
We do now.
hearing voices in her head, that's why he thought she was drunk. I have to say that I'm back on Rosh Hashanah reading this.
yeah, I was going to say Barbara Bloom used to read it for us.
Actually, before Barbara did, for many, many years, Lou and I read this on Rosh Hashanah. And in my
Oh,
head,
that's right.
I'm
That's
reading
right.
the words from the other, not from the Mishkan Hanefesh, from the other prayer book, the older one. And the wording is so different, and I'm having a really hard time.
So talk to me about that. What's different?
Well, the word God instead of the word Lord in the other book. I've been pouring my heart out to the Lord. Do not take your servants so debased. This is much more in today's language. I think this one is actually easier. Well, both of them let you know how she's feeling, just with different wording. I guess because I know the other one so well. But in my mind, I was
translation is a funny thing, and actually, I kind of pulled from a couple of different sources to put this translation together to try and make it as readable as it can be, so that it doesn't feel esoteric.
right.
And sometimes, at least for me, that Lord language, thou, thy, can feel distant. And I was trying to bring Hana into our vernacular.
Right. But I picture her with her head bowed and just, almost with her hands fidgeting a little bit and, moving her lips. And I can absolutely see why she would look like a drunkard, to somebody who did not know what was in her heart. So
who said it? Because I want to take note of it and come back to it. Who said it made it like she was talking to herself?
I did.
Yeah. Hold on to that idea, because hold on to that. I want to come back. I love that language. So right, we kind of, oh yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
I was wondering if this is where we first got silent prayer from.
Well, and that's why I started where we started, Hana. Sorry, okay, thank you, Hana. Carolyn has hit the nail on the head. Hana is our instigator of silent prayer, and what we're gonna get to in a moment is this is an entirely different type of prayer than what we see throughout the Tanakh. And our rabbis in the writing of the Talmud are kind of fascinated and potentially they like things they can understand. They are keva driven, and Hana is all kavanah. So they try very hard to understand her and make meaning of whatever this is. But we're going to get there after we have a brief discussion, because the rabbis are going to try and intone the words she would have spoken had she not been silent. So I'm going to turn to you and ask you to put the words on her heart, put the words of Hana's heart into language. What was Hana not saying?
Well, she was saying two things about being barren. And one of them is, if only I were not barren, I would have a son who would serve God.
So kind of an if-then deal with God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in the Bible made deals with God.
That is an interesting dynamic of Tanakh for sure. What else? What were her intone her silence?
I think she was probably saying, I need to be whole, and having a child that I can dedicate to you will make me whole. It will make me whole religiously, and it will make me whole as a woman.
Or
A son, not a child, a son.
Very right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why dedicate this child to God?
Probably to thank him for making her whole.
Mm.
Maybe that was the only way she felt that she'd be worthy of having a son, having a child at all.
Well, but she does say here, do not take your servant for a worthless woman. So does she feel worthless? Doesn't seem like it. I think she's just basically pouring her heart out, speaking from compassion, letting everything out that she needs to let out. And I was also wondering, why does it say speaking on her heart rather than through her heart? Is there a reason for that?
Well, the rabbis are going to play with that in a moment.
Okay.
Yes, they ask the same exact question. So when we think about different types of prayer, you've kind of hit on all of them. When we take our time to pray silently, what are the types of prayers that we create? I want, I need, wow, look at this creation and in awe of what God has created.
And gratitude also.
And that's number 3. And thank you for ... And you hit all of them in the composition of Hannah's prayer, that kind of, this is what I want, this is what I need, and this is what I'll give you in return. Thank you for what I trust you are going to give me. These are all the types of prayers that happen when we are praying silently. In some cases, it's also some of those keva prayers as well. But that composition makes a lot of sense to me. So the words that are spoken are about dedicating the child to God. So what do we know about the type of life that she is committing this child to?
priesthood.
Priesthood, exactly.
Well, it's not. It's more than that. It's Nazarite. So it is a full life dedication that consecrates. Usually, a person consecrates themselves. To be pre-consecrated for this is a slightly different way to it. But Nazarites don't cut their hair, they don't drink alcohol, and they never touch a corpse. And their life is dedicated to the eternal. So since you have mentioned, let's find out this on her heart. We're going to take a look. So I mentioned the rabbis really want to understand what isn't being said in Hannah's story. So we turn to the words of brachot, and this is a small section. They actually spend a fair amount of pages discussing Hannah, but this was specifically that term on her heart, and they take it in a very different direction, which is why I wanted to share it with you than where I would or where I think any of us would think to take it. So the stuff in bold are the words of the rabbis. The stuff that is not bolded is Steinsaltz. So it's commentary to fill in the blanks and make it more readable. So the Gemara continues to deal with Hannah's prayer. It is said, and Hannah spoke on her heart. Several interpretations are offered to explain her use of the phrase on her heart instead of the common phrase to her heart. Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Yosei ben Zimra, Hannah spoke to God concerning matters of her heart. She said before him, Master of the universe, of all the organs you created in a woman, you have not created one in vain. Every organ fulfills its purpose: eyes to see, ears to hear, a nose to smell, a mouth to speak, hands with which to perform labor, feet with which to walk, breasts with which to nurse. If so, these breasts that you placed upon my heart, to what purpose did you place them? Was it not in order to nurse with them? Grant me a son, and I will nurse with them.
Interesting.
Why the laughter? I don't disagree with the response. Why are you laughing?
Son instead of a child.
Mm.
Just that she is almost equating her breasts and her nursing with her heart, and I never thought of it that way, but I yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
It's very I love the anatomy of it. It is I just think it's a really interesting response. And I think by putting this in her mouth, I think they're turning her into a very clever character. I think they're giving her a lot of credit here, because of who she's going to eventually bear, right? Spoiler alert, we know what's going to happen here. That this turn of phrase, they're giving it such a clever little turn of phrase that I just thought this was a really fun understanding, and so different from, what did we think that Hannah was discussing with God in her silent prayer? And this is what the rabbis are putting into her mouth in her silence. What are your thoughts?
It's funny when I picture on your heart, it doesn't seem like it's, I picture in my mind a picture of a heart, okay, of your heart, a real anatomy picture of your heart, and that the words are not coming from within. They're coming from the surface. That's why I asked you originally, why did they say that? So it doesn't seem like it's the real her. How does she really feel? Is it coming from within or coming from a place which is expected to be this way?
Well, all women were expected to be this way. We weren't worthy unless we produced children, primarily sons.
I think the rabbi's interpretation, though, is almost all keva and misinterpreting her kavanah, in my opinion. I think her intentions were much different.
Right.
Well, and the rabbis are very keva driven.
Yeah.
They're trying to understand based on fact. They're not. I'm trying to think of an example where it's feeling based. It's really there. I can't think of one off the top of my head. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but they're trying to make sense and create order in a system that is still in the process of being created. So, I mean, what comes to mind, which is the essence of this, is when a phrase says you need to say the Shema at night, and they spend the next 30 chapters trying to define what at night means, they are completely driven by keva. So of course, Hannah would be a conundrum to them, and such an interesting thing for them to pull out, trying to bring keva, as you say, into her kavanah. I thought it was super clever. So we're going to move on. All right. Early the next morning, they bowed low before the Eternal, and they went back home to Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife in the biblical sense, and Hannah and the Eternal with his wife, and the Eternal remembered her. Hannah conceived, woohoo! And at the turn of the year, she bore a son. Not surprising. She named him Samuel, meaning I asked the Eternal for him. And when the man Elkanah and all his household were going up to offer to the annual sacrifice and his votive sacrifice, Hannah did not go up. She said to her husband, when the child is weaned, I will bring him. For when he has appeared before God, he must remain there for good. Her husband Elkanah said to her, do as you think is best. Stay home until you have weaned him, for the Eternal fulfilled God's word. All right, so we have the conclusion and we have the birth of Samuel. Any Hebrew speakers here? Shmuel. Does Shmuel mean I asked the Eternal for him?
Oh,
I don't think so.
Nope.
No.
Nope. That is the kavanah behind Shmuel's name, but actually the name I asked the Eternal for him is Shaul, Saul, who will become the first king of Israel.
Oh, okay.
So some of the commentary says that actually she's prophesizing the start of the kingdom, the king rulership over the people. Something interesting here, who gives Samuel his name? Mommy and daddy?
See.
Nope, just mommy.
Just
And
not.
and who makes the decisions about if Samuel's gonna go up to the top of to go make the sacrifice? Mommy and daddy? Nope,
Mommy.
just mommy. So there's her devotion to him, her connection to him is quite clear in this paragraph that this is Hannah's son. Elkanah is a sperm donor, if you will.
huh.
But interestingly, go back to Elkanah's comment at the beginning, his devotion to her. This was all she wanted. And by giving her the autonomy to raise him for the brief period that she would be raising him is there's a bug, is his gift to her potentially. So let's finish up our story. So the woman stayed home and nursed her son until she weaned him. When she had weaned him, she took him up with her along with 3 bowls, 1 ephah of flour. Ultimately, she gives him to Eli. Please, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you and prayed to the Eternal. It was this boy I prayed for, and the Eternal has granted me what I asked. I, in turn, hereby lend him to the Eternal. For as long as he lives, he is lent to the Eternal. And they bow low there before God. All right. So that is the conclusion of the story of Hannah. So I want to go back to that beginning part. Hannah got what she prayed for when she prayed so fervently. Would any of her dreams had come true if Peninnah had not bullied her?
She'd have found a way.
You think?
I don't know. It's a good question.
So I'm attempting to recharacterize Peninnah instead of as the villain, as the catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
She is 100% painted the villain throughout commentary, but none of this would have happened had her taunting not have pushed her. At least that's what we can get from the text. So are we open to seeing Peninnah in a slightly more positive light? Or is she just the mean girl and that's it?
Well, do we see the snake in a more positive light from Adam and Eve?
Well, it depends. Do you like thinking for yourself now, Leah?
Pretty much.
Hindsight is a wonderful gift. When we can see the characters that create the drama in order for change to happen, we can see them in a different light. And potentially, when you move far enough away from a scenario and you can see how X helped you move through Y to get to Z, is that part of the process of tshuva, the process of forgiving by seeing a really crappy situation, but seeing it as the catalyst for change? Are we able to forgive Peninnah and give her the blessing of having inspired this fervency in Hannah?
Yes.
I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason. And sometimes you get from one step to the next because of the events around you. But I have a hard time thinking of Penina as a kind woman. I'll give her the credit that, no, I can't even give her the credit. I have a hard time with characters that are unkind or that are bullying someone. Was that her intention? That wasn't her intention. I don't think Penina said to herself, now listen, if I am really unkind to my rival, which is what they refer to each other, I'll help her get to another step. I don't think so. I think she was unkind.
Well, in the same way that we can't necessarily know Hannah's kavanah, we also don't know Penina's, and we're much kinder. Hey, maybe in Hannah's kavanah, she threatened God. Maybe she was really rude in her kavanah and held God hostage. If you don't do this, I'm gonna, I don't know, fill in the blank. We've painted Hannah's kavanah in a very positive light and made the assumption, again, because of the story. I'm not saying either is right or wrong, but what I'm getting to is we can understand people's keva because we hear it, we see it, we read it, but we can't always understand the kavanah, the intentionality behind it. And we've talked about this in the past, that it's really easy to judge one another. And how do we try to see a positive kavanah in potentially a negative character? So I leave that there. So we've explored the story of Hannah and gratefully made the connection to Rosh Hashanah. So I'm going to kind of tie those pieces together. What lessons do we learn from Hannah and Dafka? Why are those lessons tied to Rosh Hashanah?
Question.
Well, Rosh Hashanah is, the start of the new year and a new beginning and a chance to start anew. And, with Hannah having her child and it's her chance to live her life anew the way she wanted to.
Great. What else?
I wonder if she didn't occasionally tell Penina, na, 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 na.
So what lesson are we learning from that, Carolyn?
I don't know that there's a lesson, but I think she got some satisfaction from having a child.
Yeah, I think she definitely got satisfaction from having a child.
That's Carolyn's kavanah. We don't we don't know if Hannah really felt that way.
I had multiple miscarriages before I had my son.
After this part of the story, there's very little about Penina mentioned.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, and Hannah as well. We see that Hannah kind of goes to visit her kid at camp, but more than that, it moves on to the story of Shmuel, as it should, but it's Shmuel's origin story.
Yeah.
So a few other connections that are a little on the keva side, and I want you to think a little bit more on this kavanah side. So the Torah portion that we read on Rosh Hashanah is the birth of Isaac and Sarah being told in her 90s that she's going to become a parent, which she has the most human reaction, as Carolyn just demonstrated, that any 90-year-old would have when being told she's about to become a mother. She laughs. So just from a keva standpoint, it's the relationship between two stories of you can't, and then receiving the gift of God, and then you can. To Denise's point, it's that birth of new life, that the birthday of a world, the birth of a new stage, and also it's the birth of a new rulership over the Israelites with the birth of the kings of Israel. And there's a piece of this that I like about the notion of kavanah and the tie to tshuva, that we can't know a person's kavanah. That is a personal thing. And that if we can forgive or see past what we think someone intended behind something and attempt to see something different and renew that relationship, I think that that's potentially a beautiful tie-in to the high holidays as we're still a month off from it, that we begin Elul and start really thinking about this stuff. But I wanted to bring in this Haftarah, this female related to the high holidays, because we only have one more study session before then, and I think we're doing Sarah for the next one because it makes sense with the Torah portion. So I wanted to bring this as a way to think about how we characterize and attempt to understand people's kavanah. So any other final thoughts on Hana? Any other lessons we might take away from her?
I like the notion of kavanah, and I like thinking about how different we all interpreted your lesson today. We all had different comments, and although we may not agree with one another, we are all respectful of each other's, but they're different. They're all different.
Yeah, Sheila, thank you for mentioning that, because that's been a thread through our learnings together, and you haven't been at the others. So thank you for feeling that thread, because that's definitely been, hearing diverse opinions and respecting one another has been a really continuous thread. Go ahead, Denise.
Also, Hannah's prayer was answered, and her prayer wasn't a structured Keva type prayer. Her prayer was just in her own words from her heart. It was how we started out, take a moment for a silent prayer, but hers, there's so many different ways to pray. And it seems as though that prayer was the one, praying from her heart was the one that was most important. And that was the one God responded to.
Isn't that interesting, right?
Yes.
And that was at a time of the sacrificial cult. So they brought their sacrifices regularly and it didn't procure the results. And then finally, she works outside of the system. Yeah. And that is the prayer that gets answered. I love that. I think it's a great opportunity for us to see our time of silent prayer in a special, elevated way. So we move on now to our prayer of Rosh Chodesh. And I'm going to share my screen again. So Tfilat Rosh Chodesh Av. So the background is intentional. The month of Av is it houses the holiday of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is the anniversary of the destruction of both temples. Now, we as Reformed Jews often take this holiday and need to reframe it, because the reality is the destruction of the sacrificial cult, which ultimately that's what that was in 70 CE, spawns the birth of Judaism as we know it today. There wouldn't be Reformed Judaism. There wouldn't be Judaism as we understand it. Prayer, what replaces the sacrifices are the prayers. And without that moment, this wouldn't exist. So most congregations, I'll never forget in my last congregation, we had morning minyan every day, and on the 9th of Av, and then breakfast. And on the 9th of Av, we wouldn't have breakfast. It's a fast day. And there was always this contention, should we have breakfast or not breakfast? Because we don't, reform, as like I say, as Reformed Jews, we don't see this as a fast day. It's not a celebration per se, but it's also not a day of mourning. So I present that as information, and in honor of, come on, what are you seeing? So in honor of this being a contentious, happy or sad, somewhere in the middle, I'm going to respond to that the same way that we do with Hallel during Passover. So Hallel, the prayers of praise that we're going to do here, during Passover, there are 5 different psalms, and on Passover you do a shortened Hallel because we cannot praise in our fullness when we looked back at the Egyptians and saw them drowning. So as a nod to that, we do a shortened Hallel because our joy is not full. And in response to that, we're going to skip Ashrei as a nod to the fact that the month of Av is a combination of joy and sadness. We move on to our prayer for Hallel. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro et hahalel. B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am loez. B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am loez. Hayta Yehuda lekodsho, Yisrael mamshlotav. Hayam rav ayanos, Hayarden yisov leachor. Harim rakedu chelim, Givaot kivnei tzon, B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am loez. B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am loez. Malecha hayam kitanus, Hayarden tisov leachor. If you're new to this piece, you should be repeating after me. My apologies. Harim tirkedu chelim, Givaot kivnei tzon, Milifnei Adon Chuli Aretz, Milifnei Eloi Yaakov Hahofchi Hatzor Agamayim Chalamish Lemaiноmayim. All right, so Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself.
Sure.
Thank you.
Figure it out.
The little microphone.
I don't have them. Ah,
There you go, perfect. Hodu Ladonai. Together. Ki tov ki leolam. Ki leolam chasto. Yomarna, Yomarna, Yisrael ki leolam. ki le'olam chasto. Yai-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Yomruna, Yomruna, Veit Aharon ki le'olam chasto. Yai-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Yomruna, Yomruna, Yireh Adonai ki le'olam chasto. Yai-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da, yai-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So we have come to the point in our Rosh Chodesh liturgy where we are strengthened by Adonai, and our way of showing that is by sharing our intention for the month of Av. So for me, I'm going to share my intention for the month of Av to not make assumptions about the kavanah of those around me. Ozi v'zimrat yah Vayehi li lishua. And I just realized that I was incredibly redundant in saying that, because we've said all along that we set our intention for the month of Av, which is our kavanah for the month. So that I've made my kavanah for the month, that I don't make assumptions about other people's kavanah. I just realized. Very nice. Ozi v'zimrat yah vayehi li lishua. Is anybody else interested in sharing their kavanah, their intention for the month of Av? Feel free to unmute and share.
I don't have a share, but I just read Nina's post, which I don't know in the chat, which is really interesting, that they named their first son Samuel because of that haftarah, because of what we just read. And that's very, very cool.
Oh, wow. Oh, very cool. I love that.
That makes my heart smile.
Yeah,
if that's possible.
Totally. Ozi v'zimrat yah vayehi li lishua. Ozi v'zimrat yah vayehi li lishua. Sharon, I see you unmuted yourself. Would you like to speak?
Yes. This has to do with COVID, and it also has to do with our theme today. I know myself and a lot of other friends, we're kind of angry at people who won't do the right thing for COVID. Not wear a mask, not take the vaccine, so many things. Go into a store, why can't they put on a mask behind the counter? So recently, and I mean really recently, just a few days ago, I started thinking that everybody who's walking around not doing what I think is the proper thing to do can't really be judged, because in their mind, they feel that they are doing the best they can. So it kind of goes along with our theme. I'm going to try to understand a little better about how people are dealing with the pandemic, which we have no experience in.
Right. That's such a valuable, we take on the weight of judging other people's choices, and it really doesn't get us anywhere, and it doesn't change them at all. So if it's not doing us any good, I love that. Leave that judgment behind. Ozi v'zimrat yah vayehi li anybody else would like to share? Nina, if you want to put something into the chat and we will, Denise will speak it on your behalf. But I'm going to sing one more time, and unless someone else, Helene, did you unmute because you have something you want to share?
Yeah, I'm actually in Miami now with my children, and we've been watching the Surfside demolition and stuff like that. And I think people have to realize that you should live your life every day to the best that you can, because you never know what's going to happen. And so, to me, that has affected me this past week or so, because of all the deaths. And they've showed families that lost everybody and everything. And there were rabbis. My daughter-in-law used to work with Beth Am, and she knows lots of people that live there. And so I just like the message that, live your life every day the best you can.
And I think we turn to the holy words of Rent. There is no day but today. That's such an important reminder, Helene. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'll unmute. I'll mute now.
I appreciate you sharing. So being able to see one another's faces, we conclude our prayers of Rosh Chodesh with the words of Hallelujah, that we shall praise, we shall find joy, we shall take moments of public and private prayer to communicate, to pour out our hearts, to open our hearts, to have things on, in, and around our hearts, and hopefully find trust and strength in our Creator as we try to do that. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah. Chodesh Tov, my friends. Feel free to unmute and wish one another Chodesh Tov.